Today's video is sponsored by DistroKid. If you want to get your music on the likes of Spotify and Apple Music, check the description below for a discount on your first year today. This video, I'm going to break down the basics of building a drum and bass beat or a break, some of the key things we can do and some of the most common patterns used in the genre. And if you've got any questions, please throw them in the comments down below. Let's get into it. All right, so let's break down how we can build different breaks and most of the fundamental breaks used in drum and bass. So we're just gonna work with the three fundamental elements, okay? Kick drum, snare drum, hi-hat. I've color coded it so the kick drum will always be red, snare drum will be yellow, and hi-hat or percussion, whatever you want to call it, is always going to be that purpley color. So for the sake of complexity, we're going to start off just working in one bar. Now we break one bar down into beats. You can see the counter at the top. We've got 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, and 1, 4, which is this pattern. It's a classic 4 on the floor, and you would have heard a pattern like this at some point. Now we can just place hi-hats between all of those points on what we call the and. So the and is the beat directly in the middle of the two. So we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. To make something like that. Now the groove setter in a genre like D&B is always going to be the hat. So putting that on the 1 and the and, you end up with a pattern like this. Now that feels and sounds really rigid, but we'll have a look as we go through breaking down these breaks, some of the things we can do to add loads of extra feel using that pattern. Now your snare drum, with some exceptions, in certain patterns that we can create, will almost always be on the 2 and the 4, which gives us something like this. Then the most common thing to do is have the drums on the 1 and the 3. It's the most rigid thing you can do. Now by far the most common pattern you'll find in drum and bass is just taking the second kick and putting it on the and that's called syncopation, and that gives a feeling of pace. And if you listen to any popular music, you've heard this drum pattern hundreds of times. The other thing you can play around with is putting it on the and right at the end, so you don't have a kick between the two. Or adding a couple of extra kicks and having them land on both of the ands. The more you add in, the more pace you get. With that by far being the most common. You can add a double kick at the start, then have a bit of a space and add the other two on the and it gives a real feeling of pace change. Or to keep the pace going throughout. Notice the hi-hats or snare haven't had to change position at all here. All we're doing is changing that rhythm with the kick drums. We can use velocity to play into the rhythm as well. So if we were to take the double kick option here and then lower the velocity of the second hit, it gives us a different feel again. When we've got much lower velocities, we can get away with putting the notes a bit closer, and these are generally called ghost notes. They add a bit of extra rhythm by just using the same sound with varying velocities. You can do these with the snare as well. We can return to our standard very easy there. Another really common pattern is to have the second snare late and put it on the and fill in the space it leaves with kick drums in a pattern similar to this. You as well may sometimes hear something like this. We've shifted the snare backwards onto where we'd usually find a kick. Now if we put the snare back on the and move the kick back, we'll get that jungly feel. Creates a really good shuffle to move into a breakdown. Now all of these have sounded a little bit rigid, and that's because of the positioning and timing of the drums is absolutely on precision. What we can do is use the hi-hat to drive more of a groove. So at the moment we can hear our very classic two-step syncopated pattern. If we highlight our hi-hats and we'll put our quantize onto 1/8, regardless of your DAW, you'll be able to do this. And you'll see here we can add some swing. And this is how that rhythm can be generated with the push and pull while keeping the snare and kicks exactly on point, which is great for a DJ mix. The more we push that swing, now maybe we also want to include the kicks in with this swing pattern, and we can do that too for this effect. And that gives us a really swingy break. Now by swinging the break like this, we've opened up lots of space that we could actually fit other small hi-hats into. And we can put them in between the beats. They're not just going on the and here, going in between entirely. This allows us to add even more rhythm into the break. We need a very small percussion sound to work here. We highlight them all, grab the swing again. This would now be swinging on 16ths rather than 8 notes. So we need to change our swing over to 16ths. And now you can see, can move those. You can, however, leave quantize off and do it manually. Now if we combine something like our ghost notes into this as well. And to take this a step further, we can change the velocity of the hi-hat and give them a feel. And again, you can see that was all built just from our initial two-step break. If this has been helpful for you, I recommend watching this video next, where I built an entire track from scratch in Logic using just Logic's sounds, using many of the techniques that I teach in these shorter videos. Look forward to seeing you guys on the next one. Take care.